Hi everyone, welcome back to Unfiltered, the podcast where we make international relations make sense. If you've been following us for the last few episodes, you know that we're in the middle of a UN series. But today, I'm pressing pause on that, just for a moment, because I want to talk about something that hit close during my recent trip. I just got back from Sri Lanka, and honestly, I was blown away by how layered and intense their history is. I knew bits and pieces before, but being there and seeing things firsthand made me want to dig deeper. So today's episode is all about Sri Lanka's journey through civil war, its terror attacks, and big power geopolitics, which I bet that you've never even heard of. Let's dive in. Sri Lanka, formerly known as Ceylon, gained independence from Britain in 1948. But even as a new nation, it inherited deep ethnic divisions. The two biggest groups were the Sinhalese majority and the Tamil minority. After independence, the Sinhalese held most of the political power. Tamils, especially in the north and the east, started feeling pushed out, discriminated against in education, jobs, and language policy. This led to rising tensions that eventually exploded into civil war in 1983. The main rebel group, the LTTE or Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, wanted a separate Tamil state. The war dragged on for 26 years, ending only in 2009 with a military victory for the government. But the cost was enormous. Over 80,000 lives lost, thousands still missing, and brutal human rights violations on both ends. The country may be post-war, but is still not fully post-conflict. A lot of pain, mistrust, and questions about justice still remains. Now jumping to 2019, on Easter Sunday, a series of suicide bombings hit churches and luxury hotels. Over 250 people were killed. The attack was carried out by a local Islamist extremist group who claimed to have links with ISIS. It was shocking. Not just because of the violence, but because it exposed how underprepared the government was. Intelligence warnings were missed, different branches weren't talking to each other, and the aftermath brought up fresh fears about extremism, national security, and religious tensions. Now let's talk about something else which may not make headlines that isn't as extreme as suicide bombings, but is just as important, which is Sri Lanka's relationship with China. Sri Lanka is right in the middle of the Indian Ocean, and that makes it extremely valuable, especially to a country like China. China's been investing heavily here as part of its Belt and Road Initiative. Big projects like the Colombo Port City have promised development and jobs, but they've also sparked a lot of controversy. Why? Because with Chinese loans come strings. Sri Lanka has to lease the Hambantota port to China for 99 years after failing to repay its debt. That sparked concerns about something called debt trap diplomacy, where financial help gives way to strategic control. Colombo Port City is newer and flashy, but the same questions linger. What does it mean for Sri Lanka's sovereignty? Who really benefits? And is this a smart move for Sri Lanka in the long run? Things hit a breaking point again in 2022. The country faced its worst economic crisis since independence. No fuel, no food, no medicine, skyrocketing inflation, and people on the streets. Protests reached a peak where citizens stormed the presidential palace. The president fled, and a new government took over. Today, Sri Lanka is trying to recover with support from the IMF and other international partners. But rebuilding trust, both at home and globally, is going to take time. So why does this story really matter? Because Sri Lanka is a real-time example of how internal divisions, global power plays, and economic policy collide. It's about resilience, but also about warning signs of what happens when systems fail and external support comes at a cost. And for me, visiting Sri Lanka made all of this feel so much more real. That's why I wanted to do this episode. We'll be back with more episodes about the UN soon, so don't worry, we're not done with that. But I hope this little detour gave you something to think about. If you liked this episode, hit follow, share with a friend, and message me your thoughts, especially if you visited Sri Lanka or studied its history. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope to see you next time.